Good morning, guys. In the last session, we started discussion related to layered architecture. So we are going to develop a project by using this layered architecture. Layered architecture means developing our application with a loosely coupling. So multiple layers will be available in the project. Like presentation layer will be available, web layer will be available, service layer will be available, and persistence layer will be available. Persistence layer contains the logic to communicate with the database. In order to develop persistence layer, earlier we used to work with JDBC, but there are some problems with the JDBC. We need to write lot of boilerplate code in the JDBC. To avoid that, we are using Hibernate. Hibernate is a framework. What is the benefit of using framework? What is the benefit of using frameworks? Framework will provide some common logics required for the application. We need to focus only on the business logic development. We can save our time if you develop the project by using framework concept. Next one, service layer will be available. Service layer will be available. So service layer contains business logic. Service layer contains business logic. So to implement that business logic, we can go for Java or we can go for some third-party libraries also. And the next one, web layer will be available in the project. What is the meaning of web layer? What is the meaning of web layer? Web layer contains controllers. Controllers are used to handle request and response. In order to develop that web layer, we can use servlets. Servlets is a technology. What is the problem with servlets technology? We need to write a lot of logic. We need to write a lot of code to deal with our application development. To overcome the problems of the servlets, people are using struts. Struts is a framework. So by using struts, we can develop web layer. Next one, view will be available, nothing but presentation layer. Presentation layer contains user interface. Earlier, people used to develop presentation layer by using JSP. Later point of time, they realized challenges with the JSP. Now, people are using Angular or React to develop presentation layer. Now, servlets, struts we can use to develop web layer. JDBC Hibernate we can use to develop persistence layer. Now, servlets is a technology. JDBC is also a technology. When you use JDBC servlet, lot of boilerplate code we need to write to develop the project. To avoid that problem, people started using frameworks. Frameworks came into picture to develop our application. What is framework? What are the advantages with the framework? What is a framework? What are the advantages with the framework? Framework is a semi-developed software. That means in the application development, two types of logics will be available. One is common logic. Second one is business logic. Business logic will change from application to application. Banking business logic, educational applications, telecom applications, e-commerce applications, right? So application to application, business logic will be different. But for all the applications, some common logics will be available. Connections, statements, result set, form data, form validation, convert the form data to object. These are the common logics for all the application. So if you write common logic and business logic, it will take more time. So to simplify the development process, we are going to use framework. What is the advantage with the frameworks? If you are using frameworks, then you can focus only on the business logic. Frameworks will provide common logics required for the application. Now, advantages. You don't need to write the same code again in the frameworks, and fast development will be faster because some logic they will provide, only some logic you have to write. Less number of code will be available. No number of bugs will be less. Maintenance of the project also will become easy when you develop that project by using frameworks. All right. Then after we started understanding, already struts available, Hibernate is available to develop a project. But what is the problem with the struts and Hibernate? What is the problem with the struts and Hibernate? Struts a framework to develop only web layer in the application. Hibernate is a framework to develop only persistence layer in the application. So I need to download two different frameworks to develop one application, but I'm looking for a solution. I need one framework which is supports for my entire application development. I want a single framework which is supports entire application development. That's where Spring framework came into picture. What is the Spring? What is the Spring, guys? Spring is an application development framework. Already Struts framework is available, Hibernate framework is available. Then why Spring framework became very popular in the market? By using Struts, you cannot develop an entire project. By using Hibernate also, you cannot develop entire project. But by using Spring, we can develop entire project. Spring is called as application development framework. Spring is providing the support for end-to-end application development, and this Spring is Java based framework, and Spring is free of cost. Spring is free of cost. You no need to purchase the license of the Spring. You can download that Spring and you can use that Spring in your project. You can develop entire application by using Spring. If you are using Spring, you no need to download Struts, you no need to download Hibernate. Spring will support for everything to develop your application. In which year that Spring framework came into picture? Spring came into picture in the year of 2004, but it took 4 to 5 years in the industry to realize the advantages of the Spring framework. Till 2008, 2009, Struts framework very popular in the market. From 2010 onwards, people started using Spring framework to develop the project. What is the current version of the Spring? The current version of the Spring is 6.x version. The first version of the Spring released in the 2004. In the 2022, the Spring 6.x version got released. To use Spring 6.x version, Java 17 is mandatory. The Spring 6.x version is developed based on Java 17 version. Now, let's understand Spring architecture. Let's understand Spring architecture. Spring is not a single framework, guys. Spring is developed in modular fashion. Spring framework developed in modular fashion. That means in the Spring framework, there are multiple modules are available. If you see the Spring architecture, then you will understand. Spring architecture. Spring architecture. Now, so if you see 1 minute, yes. Now, so this is architecture of the Spring. I can show you like this. Can you see this diagram now? This is called the architecture of Spring framework. Copy the image. Yeah. So this is called our Spring architecture. Now, Spring is not a single framework. Spring framework developed in modular fashion. So there are several modules available in the Spring framework. As I told you, by using Spring, we can develop entire application. So to develop all the layers of the application, Spring framework provided several modules. The base module in the Spring framework is core module. How we have core Java. Similarly, there is the Spring core module. Spring core module is the base module of the Spring framework, which will tell all the fundamentals available in the Spring framework. Then similarly, we are having Spring AOP module, and we are having Spring JDBC module, Spring ORM module, Spring web module, Spring servlet module, Spring AOP module, Spring Beans, Spring Core, Spring Context, Spring Test. Like this, there are several modules available in the Spring framework. Spring is not a single framework. Spring is developed in modular fashion. Sir, why these many modules available in the Spring? These modules are going to support your end-to-end application development. They are going to support end-to-end application development. So Spring framework developed in modular fashion. We have several modules. We have several modules in the Spring framework like below. There are several modules available. The first module is called as Spring core module. The first module, Spring core module, and the next one, Spring context module. Core module is available, context module is available, then Spring AOP module is available. We will understand what is the purpose of each module. Okay, so if you learn how to work with these modules, then we can say we can develop the project by using Spring framework. Spring is application development framework. It is developed by using Java, and this Spring framework is free of cost. The first version of the Spring released in the 2004. The current version of the Spring is 6.x version. This Spring framework is not a single framework. This Spring framework is developed in modular fashion. There are several modules in the Spring framework. What are the modules available? The first one is Spring core module. The second one, Spring context module. The third one, Spring AOP module. The fourth one, Spring JDBC module. We can also call this as Spring DAO module. We are having Spring JDBC module. We can also call this module as Spring DAO module. Along with that, we are having one more module that is called as Spring ORM module. We have another module called Spring ORM. Apart from this, we are having a module called Spring Web module. We can say Spring Web MVC module is available. Then similarly, we are having Spring Security. Spring Security is available. Then Spring Batch is available. Spring Cloud is available. Spring Cloud is available. Spring Data is available. Like this, there are 20 plus modules in the Spring framework. There are 20 plus modules available in the Spring framework. Some of the important module names I have mentioned here. So could you please tell me what is the Spring? Come on. Spring is a framework. What is the meaning of framework? What is the meaning of framework? Framework is a semi-developed software which will provide common logics for application development. Framework is a semi-developed software which will provide common logic for application development. If you use the framework, you can focus only on the business logic development. Within the less time, you can develop more code. You can write more code to complete your application. There are several types of frameworks available. Struts is available, Hibernate is available, Spring is available. What is the difference between Struts and Spring? Struts is used only for web layer development. Hibernate is used for only persistence layer development. I want a single framework to develop entire application. That's where Spring framework came into picture. From which year Spring is available? From 2004, the Spring 1.x version is available. What is the current version of the Spring? The current version of the Spring is 6.x version. Spring modules. Spring framework is developed in modular fashion. Spring is developed in modular fashion. There are several modules available, around 20 plus modules available in the Spring framework. For all the modules, which is the base module? Which is the base module? Spring core module is the base module. Can you read the names of the Spring modules? First one is Spring core. Second one, Spring context. Third one, Spring AOP. Fourth one, Spring JDBC. Spring JDBC also called as Spring DAO. Then next one, Spring ORM. Spring ORM is available. Next one, Spring Web MVC module, Spring Security, Spring Batch, Spring Cloud, Spring Data. Like that, there are several modules available in the Spring framework. Another beauty with the Spring, suppose if you want to develop only persistence layer by using Spring, you no need to use all the modules of the Spring. If you want to develop a persistence layer, you can take only Spring JDBC module. You can use that. All the modules in the Spring, these modules are loosely coupled. These modules are loosely coupled. So Spring framework will not force to learn all the modules or to use all the modules. Spring framework is loosely coupled framework. Every module is loosely coupled. Core module is available. AOP is available. JDBC ORM available, web module is available, messaging module is available. Is there any relation between one module to another module? No. That means the modules are independent. Spring modules are independent. So there is no rule that you need to use all the modules in the project. Which module is required, you take only that module to use in the project. It's not mandatory to learn all the modules. It's not mandatory to use all the modules. Spring is developed in modular fashion, and these modules are loosely coupled. These modules are independent. Whichever the module is required for your application, you take only that module used in your project. So that is the meaning of loosely coupled modules. Loosely coupled modules. For example, I am working on my project development. My project having web layer, service layer, and persistence layer is available. I started my project by using struts. The web layer I'm developing by using struts framework. Web layer I'm developing by using struts framework. Here my service layer is available. Okay. Now I want to develop DAO layer to communicate with the database. Now I want to develop only I started my project with the struts framework. I started my development. Struts framework I'm using to develop web layer in my application. Okay. Now I want to develop DAO layer. When I am going to develop the DAO layer, I came to know about the Spring framework. Initially, when I'm starting the project development, I don't know about the Spring. I don't know power of the Spring framework. I started the project with the struts. By using struts, can I develop entire project? No. By using struts, I can develop only web layer in the project. Now, I want to develop my DAO layer by using Spring framework. I want to develop DAO layer by using Spring framework. Do I need to use all the modules in the Spring? No. Only this DAO layer we can develop by using Spring framework. Now, I will develop DAO by using Spring DAO module, or I can use Spring ORM module. So that means you no need to use all the modules of the Spring. It is not mandatory to use all the modules. Spring framework is loosely coupled. Whatever the module is required for your application, you take only those modules and you use in your project. So that is the reason Spring framework can be integrated with other frameworks in the market. Can I use the combination of struts and Spring? Yes, we can do that. So if you want to use Spring only for DAO layer, persistence layer, you can do that. Suppose I want to use the Spring for web layer also. If you want to use the Spring for web layer, then you can go for a module called Spring Web MVC module. Spring Web MVC module is used to develop web layer. Spring DAO module used to develop persistence layer. So like this, there are several modules available in the Spring framework. All the modules are loosely coupled. Spring framework is developed in modular fashion. So all the modules in the Spring are loosely coupled. What is the meaning of loosely coupled? What is the meaning of loosely coupled? Spring modules are loosely coupled. So what I can say? These modules are independent. Is it mandatory to use all the modules in the project? No. For my project, I want only security by using Spring. I will use the struts for web layer. I will use DAO by using Hibernate. I want security for my project. That security can be developed by using Spring security. So whichever the module is required for your project, you can use that module. You can develop your project. That is called loosely coupled. Spring framework developed in modular fashion. Spring modules are loosely coupled. So there are several modules available. What are those modules? Can you read them now? What are the modules available? Spring core module is available. Spring context module, Spring AOP, Spring JDBC or Spring ORM, Spring DAO or JDBC. Both are same. JDBC, DAO, both are same. Next one, Spring ORM. Next one, Spring Web MVC. Next one, Spring Security, Spring Batch, Spring Cloud, Spring Data. Like that, there are several modules available in the Spring. Is it mandatory to develop a project with all the modules? No. We can use any module. We can use any module based on our project requirement. It's not mandatory to use all the modules. Whatever the module is required for your application, you can take only that module and you can develop your project. Now, first let's understand what is Spring Core module. We are going to learn Spring Core module first, because to work with the Spring framework or to work with the Spring Boot, the Spring Core module knowledge is required. What is the Spring Core module? It is base module in the Spring. It is base module in the Spring framework. It is providing, this Spring Core module is providing fundamental concepts of the Spring. It is providing fundamental concepts of Spring. What are those fundamentals? One is IOC container. Second one is dependency injection. Third one is auto wiring. One is IOC container. Second one is dependency injection. Third one is auto wiring. These are fundamental concepts of the Spring framework to develop a project. We need to use IOC container, dependency injection, auto wiring to develop a application by using Spring. So these fundamental concepts are provided by which module? Spring Core module. Using Spring Core, you can develop only standalone application. Okay, we can develop standalone application using core module. So core module is providing fundamental concepts of the Spring framework. So what are the fundamental concepts of the Spring? IOC container, dependency injection, auto wiring. Now, why we need to use these fundamental concepts? Using Spring Core, we can develop application classes with loosely coupling. Okay, as of now, if one class want to call another class method, for example, I have a controller. How my controller will call the DAO? How my controller will call the DAO? Controller is calling service is calling DAO. Controller class should call the service class method should call the DAO class method. How? One Java class method will call another Java class method by creating the object or by inheriting the properties. If you create the object, if you inherit the properties, classes are tightly coupled. One class should create the object of another class. But if you go for the Spring framework, you no need to create the objects. IOC container will create the object. From now onwards, we are not going to create an object for the classes. Who will create object for the classes? IOC container will create the object. Where that IOC container available? It is available in the Spring Core module. What is the purpose of Spring Core module? Spring Core module is the base module in the Spring framework. If you want to develop any application by using Spring, the mandatory things that we are going to use: IOC container, dependency injection, auto wiring. These three concepts are called fundamental concepts of the Spring. These fundamental concepts are provided by Spring Core module. What is the benefit with these concepts, guys? We can develop application classes with the loosely coupling. So what is that loosely coupling? What is the tightly coupling? We will understand with the example. So once we start the first application development by using Spring, then you will understand what is the tightly coupling and what is loosely coupling. For time being, you remember that Spring Core module is the base module of the Spring. That Spring Core module is providing fundamental concepts of the Spring. What are those fundamental concepts? IOC container, dependency injection, and auto wiring. So what is the benefit with the core module? We can develop application classes with the loosely coupling. Okay, good. The next one is Spring Context module. There is a module called Spring Context. Spring Context module used to deal with configurations in the application. So in my application, web layer will be available, persistence layer will be available, business layer will be available. Which classes should be managed by the Spring? IOC container should manage the classes. IOC container should create the object. IOC container should perform the dependency injection. All the terminology we are going to learn. So here, Spring Context Module, it is responsible for managing configurations in the application. It is responsible for managing configurations in the application, where the controllers are available in the project. How many controllers are available in the project? Where the DAO classes available in the project? For which classes object should be created by IOC container? For which class object should not be created by the IOC container? That configuration management will be taken care by Spring Context Module. Can you tell me what is a context module? Come on, what is a context module, guys? Spring Context Module is responsible for managing configurations in the application. What is the Spring Core Module? What is Spring Core? Spring Core Module is the base module that is providing fundamental concepts. What are those? IOC container, dependency injection, auto wiring. What is the main benefit of the core module? Develop the application with the loosely coupling. What is tightly coupling? What is loosely coupling? Practically we will understand with the application development. Now we are just understanding what is the Spring architecture. What are the modules available in the Spring? What is the purpose of each module? Then we will start with core module and we will develop the application. Then you will understand clearly what is the tightly coupling, what is loosely coupling, what is IOC container, what is the dependency injection, what is auto wiring. Are you clear? Just understand what is the module name and what is the purpose of the module. Next one, Spring Context Module. What is the Spring Context? What is Spring Context? The Spring Context Module is responsible for managing configurations in the application. Okay. And the next important module, that is Spring AOP. There is a module called AOP. AOP stands for Aspect Oriented Programming. AOP, we have seen already POP. We have seen POP. What is POP? Procedural Oriented Programming. Procedural Oriented Programming. After that, we have seen OOP. What is OOP? What is OOP? OOP stands for Object Oriented Programming. Procedure Oriented Programming, Object Oriented Programming is available. Object Oriented Programming. Now, AOP. AOP stands for Aspect Oriented Programming. Okay. What is the full form of the AOP? AOP stands for Aspect Oriented Programming. What is the main purpose of this AOP module? Okay. Definition may be little confusing, guys. AOP is used to separate. AOP is used to separate primary logics and secondary logics in the application. What is the purpose of AOP? AOP is used to separate primary logics and secondary logics in the application. Primary logic nothing but business logic. Primary logic nothing but our application business logic. Secondary logic nothing but cross-cutting concerns. Cross-cutting logics. Primary in our application, primary logic will be available and secondary logic will be available. Primary logic is nothing but business logic. Secondary logic is nothing but cross-cutting logic. So let's understand with some example. Now, I want to develop one banking application. I want to develop one banking application. Assume that my functionality is amount to deposit. My requirement is to develop amount to deposit, guys. I want to develop functionality for amount to deposit. If I want to develop this amount to deposit, I will write one method. Inside that method, I will write some security logic. I will write some transaction logic, and here my business logic will be available, and I will write some auditing logic, and I will write some logging. So like this, in our application, we will be having multiple requirements like this. If you want to develop a method which is responsible to deposit the amount in the bank, okay, so now in this method, security logic will be available, transaction logic will be available, actual business logic will be available, auditing will be available, logging will be available. So now if you observe in my method, primary logic, secondary logics are combined. In my method, primary logic and secondary logic is combined. What is primary logic here? Business logic, that is deposit logic. I can say deposit logic. This deposit logic is called as our primary logic, or I can say this is our business logic. Now if you observe in this method, we combined primary logic as well as business logic. Similarly, I have another requirement for amount to withdraw. I have another requirement for amount to withdraw like this. So in this logic also, what we are going to do, here also we need to write security, we need to write the transaction, and we need to implement withdraw logic. We need to implement withdraw logic. Auditing will be available, logging will be available. Now, if you observe, is there any problem in my application? What is the problem in my application now? So there are two, I have taken just two methods, guys. I have taken just two methods. One method is used to deposit the amount. Another method is used to withdraw the amount. Now, net banking login, amount to transfer, balance checking, loan application, loan payment, transaction, account statement generation, bill payment, credit card bill payment, bill recharges. So many functionalities will be available in my project. Now, assume that my project is containing 20,000 methods like this. In my project, there are 20,000 methods available like this. In every method, primary logic will be available, secondary logic also will be available. What is the meaning of primary logic? Primary logic is nothing but actual business logic. Along with that business logic, we will write some security for our methods. We will write the transaction for the method. We will write audit for the method. We will write logging for the method. These are secondary logics. These secondary logics I have to write in 20,000 methods. I have to write the secondary logic at the 20,000 places. I have to write the secondary logic at the 20,000 places. So if you observe, we are combining primary logic and secondary logic in the application. If I combine primary logic and secondary logic in the application, what is the problem? Boilerplate code is the problem. Tomorrow, I want to make some changes to my project security. I need to make some changes to my project security. Then what I need to do? I need to modify the logic at 20,000 places. So this is the problem if you combine primary logic and secondary logic in the application. Primary logic is nothing but business logic. Primary logic nothing but business logic. Secondary logic nothing but cross-cutting logics. Secondary logics nothing but cross-cutting logics. So when I say primary logic example, amount to deposit, okay, amount to withdraw, balance check, this all comes under primary logics. What is the meaning of secondary logics? Example, security is one example, transaction is one example, logging is one example, auditing is one example. So in every project, primary logic will be available and secondary logic also will be available. By default, people will combine primary logic and secondary logic in the application. What is the problem if I combine primary logic and secondary logic in the application? What is the problem if I combine primary logic and secondary logic in the application? Boilerplate code. Boilerplate code. maintenance will become very difficult. Tomorrow, I want to make some change to the security. Then I need to change at 20,000 places. After changing, again we have to test our code is working as expected or not. So a lot of maintenance problems will come if you combine primary logic and secondary logic in the application. So that's why what we are going to do, we will develop our application by using AOP. AOP stands for aspect oriented programming. There is no relation between OOP, POP and AOP. AOP is a separate, that is a Spring module. AOP stands for aspect oriented programming. Why we are going to use the AOP? AOP is used to separate primary logics and secondary logics in the application. So what is the problem if you combine both? If I develop my application like this, what is the problem, guys? Boilerplate code. Boilerplate code, maintenance will become very difficult. So that's why in the real time, what we do, we will develop security logic. We will develop security logic. We will develop transaction logic. We will develop auditing. We will develop logging. All, excuse me. All these secondary logics we are going to develop separately. All the secondary logics we are going to develop separately. We should not combine primary logic and secondary logic. And my application will contain primary logic, amount to deposit. Amount to deposit will be available. Amount to withdraw will be available. And balance check will be available. Like this, we will have several business logics in the application. Now, we are going to separate application business logics and application business logics and application secondary logics. Earlier, we combined application business logic and application secondary logic. If you combine business logic and secondary logic, maintenance problem. So that's why what we do in the real time, we will develop primary logic, secondary logics separately. These primary logics and secondary logics should be integrated. At the time of execution, primary logic should be executed, secondary logic should be executed. They are in the same class or they are in the different classes now. They are separate. Primary logic is separate, secondary logic is separate. But in the runtime, my primary logic should be executed, my secondary logic should be executed. That integration will be taken care by Spring AOP. Spring AOP is going to separate them at the compilation time. It will integrate them in the runtime. We will develop primary logic, secondary logic separately. Spring AOP module is going to integrate them and it is going to execute. Now tomorrow, when I change primary logic, is there any problem for the secondary logic? No. Why? Why there is no problem for the secondary logics? Primary logics and secondary logics are clearly separated. And who will execute them? AOP is going to execute them. So always we need to separate primary logic and secondary logic in the application at the time of development. At the time of execution, they should be integrated. That integration part will be taken care by Spring AOP. Now, if I develop like this, what is the benefit? What is the benefit? How many places I am writing security logic? Only one place I am writing the security logic. Tomorrow I want to make some changes to security. Only one place we need to do. Suppose if I don't use AOP, in every place I need to write the security. If any changes are required, I have to modify that at the all the places. That will take lot of time. This will take less amount of time. That's why some people will use Spring AOP in the project. Is it mandatory to use AOP in the project? No. Spring modules are loosely coupled. If you want, then only use it. If you don't want, you can ignore that. So if you want to maintain the project easily, If you want to separate your primary logic and business logic, then we are going to use AOP module. We have seen 3 modules as of now: core module, context module, AOP module. What is the core module? Come on, what is core module? Core module is a base module in the Spring framework. So it is providing IOC container, dependency injection, auto wiring. What is the purpose of these 3 concepts? To develop the application with the loosely coupling. Next one. What is the context module? What is the context module? Context module is responsible for managing configurations in the application. Then what is AOP module? AOP stands for aspect oriented programming. Why we need to go for AOP module? To separate primary logics and secondary logics in the application. Primary logic nothing but business logic. Secondary logics nothing but cross-cutting logics, or we can say helper logic. Cross-cutting logics, or we can say helper logic. Security, transaction, logging, auditing, all these things are comes under secondary logics. These are comes under primary logics. Are you guys clear? Very good. Next one. Let's talk about Spring JDBC module. There is a concept called Spring JDBC module. Already we have normal JDBC available. What is the purpose of normal JDBC? What is the purpose of normal JDBC? Normal JDBC to develop persistence layer. Spring JDBC also to develop the persistence layer. You can develop your persistence layer by using normal JDBC API, and you can develop the same requirement by using Spring JDBC also. Then what is the difference between normal JDBC and Spring JDBC? Come on. What is the purpose of Spring JDBC? It is used to develop persistence layer in the application. It is used to develop persistence layer in the application. Same thing can be done by using JDBC also now. Then why to go for Spring JDBC? Using Spring JDBC, we can avoid boilerplate code. Using Spring JDBC, we can avoid boilerplate code. Using Spring JDBC, we can avoid boilerplate code. Getting the register driver. I want to register the driver. Spring JDBC will handle. Okay. I want to get the connection. Who will handle that? Spring JDBC will handle that. Create a statement. Who will handle that? Do I need to handle this part? No. Spring JDBC will handle that part. Execute query. Execute query. Programmer should handle. Programmer should handle. Process result. Process result. Spring JDBC will handle. Okay. Close the connection. Who will handle that? Spring JDBC will handle. Now, see this. What is our responsibility? What is our responsibility? We should only execute the query. What about the remaining logic? Read this. Read this. Excuse me. All right. For every application, persistence layer will be available. So by using JDBC, you can develop the persistence layer. But if you use JDBC to develop the persistence layer, lot of code we have to write. Load the driver, get the connection, create the statement, execute the query, process the result, close the connection. That part we need to do manually. All right. Now, if you go for normal JDBC, then we have to write lot of code on our own. And that code we need to write at multiple places to communicate with the database. Lot of boilerplate code we need to write in the JDBC to communicate with the database. That boilerplate code, not only for my project, that is common for every project. So that's why to avoid that boilerplate code, we are going to use a concept called Spring JDBC. What is the purpose of Spring JDBC? Guys, what is the purpose of Spring JDBC? Spring JDBC is used to develop persistence layer in the application. It is used to develop persistence layer in the application. By using this Spring JDBC, we can avoid boilerplate code. You focus only on the query execution part. What query you want to execute, you focus only on the query execution part. The remaining boilerplate code steps will be taken care by Spring JDBC. Spring JDBC internally will communicate with the JDBC API. Spring JDBC module internally will communicate with JDBC. Will communicate with JDBC API. Our application will communicate with the Spring JDBC. Spring JDBC will communicate with the actual JDBC. That JDBC will communicate with the database. This Spring JDBC is also called as Spring DAO. Spring JDBC module is also called as Spring DAO. Are you clear? Good. Now, what is the benefit if you are using Spring JDBC module? What is the benefit with the Spring JDBC module? Easily we can develop persistence layer in the application. We can avoid boilerplate code in the persistence layer. You focus only on the query execution part. The remaining steps will be taken care by Spring JDBC. Can I say it is a framework? Can I say it is a framework? What this framework is doing? What this framework is doing? It is providing common logics for us. This framework is providing common logics for us. We need to focus only on the business logic. It is providing common logics. We need to focus only on the business logic development. So I need 6 steps, guys. To communicate with the database, 6 steps are required. 5 steps providing by the Spring JDBC, only 1 step programmer will take care. Only query execution part is my responsibility. The remaining 5 steps will be taken care by Spring JDBC here. That is the purpose of framework. What is framework? What is framework? Framework is a semi-developed software. What is the advantage with the framework? What is the advantage with the framework? They will provide common logics required for several applications development. We need to focus only on the business logic development. Frameworks will provide the common logics. We need to focus only on the business logic development. Are you clear? Good. Spring JDBC developed on top of the JDBC API. By using Spring JDBC, we can develop persistence layer. We can avoid boilerplate code. If you observe the steps here, everything will be taken care by Spring JDBC. Only query execution is our responsibility. Clear with this point? Online students, are you able to follow me? Is my voice clear for everyone? Yes. So if you have any questions, you can ask me at the end of the session, guys. Okay. At the end of the session, I will give option to unmute your mic so that you can ask your question. So I will share these notes also and video also in the group. So please join in that group, WhatsApp group for the Spring Boot. Link I have shared in the chat box. Anyone who is not part of that group, please join in that. Okay. Cool. Next one. There is a module called Spring ORM module. There is a module called Spring ORM. ORM stands for Object Relational Mapping. What is ORM, guys? ORM stands for Object Relational Mapping. Okay. So here Hibernate is ORM framework. Hibernate is called as ORM framework. So here, why we need to go for ORM? It is also used to develop persistence layer. JDBC available to develop the persistence layer. Spring JDBC available to develop the persistence layer. Hibernate available to develop the persistence layer. Spring ORM also to develop the persistence layer. ORM will represent data in the form of objects. When you go for JDBC, they will represent the data in the result set format. They will represent the data in the text format. But Java is a object-oriented language. I want to represent everything in the object format. So to represent the data in the object format, we are going to use ORM. ORM stands for Object Relational Mapping. ORM will represent the data in the form of objects. So here, Hibernate is a ORM framework. What we can do with the Hibernate? Hibernate is used to develop persistence layer. So as we have seen in the layered architecture, JDBC is available, Hibernate is also available. What is the difference between JDBC and Hibernate? JDBC will represent the data in the text format. Hibernate will represent the data in the object format. That is called object relational mapping. So by using JDBC, we can develop persistence logic. By using Hibernate also, we can develop persistence logic. Here, instead of using Hibernate, people will use Spring ORM. Instead of using Hibernate, people will use Spring ORM. If you use a Hibernate, 10 lines of code you have to write to insert the record or to retrieve the record. If you go for Spring ORM, 1 line of code. Okay. By using Hibernate, you can communicate with the database. You can represent the data in the form of objects. Same thing we can do by using Spring ORM also. What is the benefit with the Spring ORM? We can avoid boilerplate code. Common logics in the Hibernate will be taken care by Spring ORM. Spring ORM developed on top of Hibernate. Using Spring ORM, we can avoid boilerplate code in DAO layer. Instead of working with the Hibernate directly, people are going to use Spring ORM to develop the projects. Now, let's understand. So here, when you are developing persistence layer, our application will be available. Our application can communicate with the JDBC API. JDBC API will communicate with the database. Now, see here. Application is available and application will communicate with the JDBC API. JDBC API will communicate with the database. This is normal development. We can develop one application. Our application will communicate with the JDBC API. JDBC API internally will communicate with the database, guys. So this is basic we have done in the advanced Java. We will develop a project. Our project will communicate with the JDBC. JDBC will communicate with the database. If I don't want to do like this, then we will develop one application. Our application will communicate with the Spring JDBC. Spring JDBC will communicate with the normal JDBC API. That JDBC API will communicate with the database. This is other way to develop a project. Application will be available. It will communicate with the Spring JDBC. It will communicate with JDBC API. It will communicate with the database. Now, if you see, My application can talk to Spring JDBC. Spring JDBC will talk to JDBC. Then JDBC will talk to database. Are you clear? So what is the difference between approach 1 and approach 2? What is the difference between approach 1 and approach 2? If I directly communicate with the JDBC API, what is the problem? You need to deal with the driver, you need to deal with the connection, you need to deal with the statement, query, everything. You are responsible to write everything in the project. You need to work on business logic, you need to work on common logics also. To avoid that boilerplate code, our application can communicate with the Spring JDBC. What is the benefit? If my application communicating with the Spring JDBC, then what is the benefit? Come on, guys. What is the benefit? Common logics will be taken care by Spring JDBC. You focus only on the query part. You focus only on the query part. The remaining logics will be taken care by Spring JDBC. But here, if you go for approach 1 or approach 2, you need to represent the data in the text format. Okay, I want to insert the data or I want to retrieve the data. Everything we will represent in the text format, but I want to represent the data in the object format. I want to represent the data in the object format. For that, what people will do is they will develop application. Application will be available. Our application will communicate with the Hibernate. Application will communicate with the Hibernate. What Hibernate will do? Hibernate will communicate with the JDBC API. That JDBC API will communicate with the database. So this is what people are doing currently. Okay, application is available. Our application will communicate with the Hibernate. Hibernate will communicate with the JDBC. JDBC will communicate with the database. Right. What is the benefit? What is the benefit, guys? What is the benefit? First thing is, I am not directly talking to JDBC. If I talk to JDBC, boilerplate code. I am talking to Hibernate. What is this Hibernate? It is a ORM tool. Hibernate is called as a ORM tool. What is the meaning of ORM? What is the meaning of ORM? Object relational mapping. We will represent the data in the form of objects. ORM stands for object relational mapping. It is used to represent the data in the form of objects. But here also, you need to write some boilerplate code. If you go for a Hibernate, you need to write the boilerplate code. How to avoid that boilerplate code? How to avoid that boilerplate code? By using Spring ORM. Application will be available. Application will communicate with the Spring ORM. Application will communicate with the Spring ORM. Spring ORM will communicate with the Hibernate. Hibernate will communicate with the JDBC. Hibernate will communicate with JDBC. JDBC will communicate with the database. Okay. So if you directly use the Hibernate, you need to write some boilerplate code. To avoid that boilerplate code in the Hibernate, we are going to use Spring ORM module. Our application will communicate with the Spring ORM. Spring ORM will communicate with the Hibernate. Hibernate will communicate with the JDBC. JDBC will communicate with the database. So now people want to develop persistence logic with the objects representing the data. For that, you can go for Hibernate or you can go for Spring ORM. If you go for Hibernate, you need to write lot of code. So if you want to avoid the common logics in the Hibernate, then go for Spring ORM. You focus only on the business logic. Common logic will be taken care by Spring ORM. Are you guys able to understand? But in the industry nowadays, people are using Spring data, not Spring ORM. Okay. On top of the Spring ORM, one more module came into picture, that is called Spring Data module. Okay, so if you go for Spring ORM, if you go for Spring ORM, what we need to do? You take care of the query. You take care of the query. Remaining part will be taken care by Spring ORM. But in the current market, you no need to write the query also. You no need to write the query also. Query also will be taken care by our Spring data module. I want to insert the record. You no need to write any query. That will generate the query to insert the record. I want to retrieve the record. You no need to write anything. That will take care of retrieving the record from the table. So now in the industry currently applications are developing like this. Application will be available. Our application will communicate with the Spring Data JPA. Spring Data JPA will communicate with the Spring ORM. Spring Data JPA will communicate with Spring ORM. Spring ORM will communicate with the Hibernate. Hibernate will communicate with the JDBC. JDBC will communicate with the database. So this is the level of development in the market today. So in the last session, I have shown you one line of code to communicate with the database. That one line of code we are writing by using data JPA. You no need to write a single query also to communicate with the database. You just write one line of code to perform CRUD operations with the database. Insertion, updating, deleting, retrieving, everything will be taken care by Spring Data JPA. You no need to write anything. You don't need to write anything. Now, our application is going to communicate with data JPA. Data JPA will communicate with the ORM. ORM will communicate with the Hibernate. Hibernate will communicate with the JDBC. JDBC will communicate with the database. We need to learn this development. Approach 1 is what? Normal JDBC. Approach 2, Spring JDBC. Approach 3, Hibernate. Approach 4, Spring ORM. Approach 5. Currently, industry using which approach? Data JPA. So this is industry standard. In the industry, people will develop the application by using data JPA. Why we need to develop application by using data JPA? You no need to write the queries also. You no need to write the queries also. That will be taken care by Spring Data JPA. Without writing single query also, your application can communicate with the database. No need to get the connection. No need of driver. No need of statement. No need of result set. No need of query also. No need of query also. Who will take care of the queries? Who will take care of the queries? Spring Data JPA will take care of the queries. Now, are you clear? What is Spring JDBC? What is the Spring ORM? What is the Spring Data? Spring JDBC, Spring ORM, Spring Data, all are used to develop persistence layer only. But in the industry currently, people are using Spring Data JPA to develop persistence layer. Why we need to go for Spring Data JPA to develop the persistence layer? Come on. No need to write anything. You no need to write anything. No common logic, no business logic. Business logic also will be taken care by data JPA. That means query construction, query execution, data processing, everything will be taken care by data JPA. Are you clear with this? Perfect. Look at this. Sir, how can we communicate with the database without query? That is power of data JPA. Data JPA will generate our queries. It will write the queries for us. It will execute our queries. You no need to write anything. You no need to write anything. Look at the diagrams. Approach 1, approach 2. Approach 1 and approach 2. Approach 3, 4, 5. So which one we need to focus more now? Data JPA. Why? You no need to write anything. The queries also will be taken care by Data JPA. Perfect. And next one, we are having a module called Spring Web MVC module. There is a module called Spring Web MVC module. It is used to develop web applications by using Spring Web MVC to develop web applications with the MVC architecture. It is used to develop web applications with the MVC architecture. So basically it supports web layer plus you can develop web layer and you can develop presentation layer also by using this Spring Web MVC. So by using Web MVC, you can develop web layer, you can develop web application. Instead of writing the servlets in the application, now we are going to write Spring Web MVC classes to develop our web applications. Okay, so we discussed about core module. What is the purpose of core module? Base module to develop applications with the loosely coupling, IOC container, dependency injection, auto wiring. Those are part of core module. And the next one, Spring context module. It will deal with the configurations in the application. Then Spring AOP module. What is the purpose of AOP? AOP stands for aspect oriented programming. It is used to separate primary logics and cross-cutting logics in the application. Then next one, Spring JDBC or DAO. It is used to develop persistence layer. You take care of only query. Remaining thing will be taken care by Spring JDBC. And we have Spring ORM. You take care of the query. Remaining things will be taken care by ORM. It will represent the data in the form of object. So apart from this, we have a module called Spring Data JPA. You no need to write the query also. Everything will be taken care by Data JPA to communicate with the database. And the next one, we have a module called Spring Web MVC module. What is the purpose of Web MVC module? It is used to develop web layer. In the application. If you want to develop a web application by using Spring, then we are going to use Spring Web MVC module. Are you clear? Good. Next one, there is a module called Spring Security. So for every application, security is important. So security, we can secure our applications by using Spring Security module. We can secure our applications using Spring Security. This Spring Security mainly provides two logics. One is called authentication. Second one is called authorization. So authentication represents who can access our application. Which user can access what functionality? Role-based access. Okay. So which user can access which functionality, that will be decided by authorization. Which user can log into our application, that will be decided by authentication. So in order to secure our applications, we are going to use Spring Security concept. What is the purpose of Web MVC? Web MVC used to develop web layer in the application. Spring Security used to develop authentication, authorization logic in the application. Spring Data JPA to develop persistence layer in the application. Spring JDBC also for persistence layer. Spring AOP separate primary and secondary logic. Spring Context to deal with the configuration. Spring Core base module to develop application with the loosely coupling. Core module is providing IOC container, dependency injection, and auto wiring. Are you clear with these modules? Right? So there are some other modules also available. The purpose of those modules we will discuss in the tomorrow session, and we will start with the Spring Core module from tomorrow. Okay, so we will learn Spring Core module. Without Spring Core module, you can't understand the Spring framework. Is this fine? Good. So anybody having any questions? Offline students? You got the clarity? What is framework? What is the Spring? What are the modules in the Spring? Yes, what is the Spring? Spring is a application development framework. Why it is called as application development framework? Why it is called application development framework? We can develop all the layers in the application by using Spring. It is free of cost. The current version is 6.x. Spring framework developed in modular fashion. There are several modules available. Core, context, AOP, JDBC, ORM, data JPA, WebMVC, security. Like that, there are several modules available. Is it mandatory to use all the modules? No. Modules are loosely coupled. Which module is required for you? You take only that module, use in your project. Are you clear? Good. Thank you guys. With this, I'm stopping for today. Tomorrow we'll continue. Yeah. Online students, anybody having any questions? Yeah. Notes I will share in the WhatsApp group. You can join in the group. Notes I'm going to share in the WhatsApp group. You can join in that to get that information.